Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're listening to us, watching us. My name's Tom. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and welcome to Recovery Live. It's our weekly show where we discuss all things addiction and recovery, actually. Um, Anna Branson, hello. She's on really quick today. That was wonderful before we hardly got the show going. I'm really excited, guys, with our Nevada City retreat coming up. I just want to announce that coming up on the 5th to the 7th of May. It's filling up rather quickly. If you're in the California area, it's probably relatively easy for you to come to, but we have people coming from all over the country to hear the message of the founders of AA, that the steps as we have been taught them by Clarence Snyder and his sponsees, Steve Foreman and Jack Rappin, Dale Morford and their wives. And so we're really excited about that. There's some really exciting things, guys, going on in New York City. Some things in the works. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag right now, but several partnerships are in the offing, and some commuter retreats within the city that'll be done on a regular basis, and even some regular retreats done in the Bay Area, along with our move into Southern California with the retreat that's going to be held in Malibu way out in December. But we're coming to Southern California little by little. We're going to be there. Anyway, it's Easter weekend for those in the Christian faith. It's Good Friday for us who are Christian. So this is the day that was like one of the saddest days in the Christian faith when Jesus was nailed to the cross. And it leads us into this, the resurrection weekend coming up on Sunday. So I'm sure some of you are off today. We may have some viewers that are off and watching us. So we hope you can join us, and you're going to have a happy and joyous weekend. Today I have two guests on that both lead spiritual communities, and we're going to talk about addiction within their communities. We're going to hear their story a little bit, and we're going to talk on a high level and even a pretty deep level on what they're seeing in their communities and what's working, and how maybe what we do could help them or has helped them already. And I am excited to have this conversation, as I know both of my guests. I met my first guest just last week in California, in Orange, California, just this beautiful little town. Shocked me when I went into it because I was not expecting it to be that way. I don't know what I was expecting, but I was like, whoa, I really love this place. But I'd like to welcome Reverend Bobbi Becker, who is the senior leader of the Namaste Center for Spiritual Living in Orange, California. I hope I got that right.
Good morning. Or for me, good morning.
For you, good morning. Right. Yeah, you're the good morning. The good day. And then we have as you can see, our people from the UK, it's evening for them.
Right.
Thanks for coming on, Bobbi. I still am thinking about that conversation we had at the coffee shop, and it was just so nice to meet you and just talk to you about what's going on with you, and then giving you a little insight in what we're doing. And I'm always encouraged with how much connection there actually is in a lot of things that we're all doing, you know? So
Yes.
My next guest, he's been here before. He is the founder of Restoration Church down in St. Joseph, Missouri. So I'd like to welcome Tim Doyle.
Good morning and afternoon and evening to everyone.
Tim's got it. So it's still morning for you, right, Tim?
Good morning. Yep.
Right. And Bobbi, as much as Orange was a little bit of a surprise for me, St. Joseph, Missouri is quite a surprise if you've ever been there. It's a place to go.
We think so.
What part of Missouri, Tim? What part of Missouri is it?
We're on the west coast of Missouri, so we're literally on the border with Kansas. I could throw a rock and hit Kansas, but they wouldn't appreciate that. So
my father lives in just north of Kansas City.
That's where I'm at.
Yep.
Just north of Kansas City. Exactly.
It's a sleepy little town with no traffic at all, Bobby. None. If you want to go, because we before we came on, Tim, I was reeling about the traffic in California. Of course, the Californians are just like, well, that's just is what it is.
Whatever. Yeah.
But when you go to St. Joseph, you are golden. There is no traffic in St. Joseph ever.
Just the horse and buggies, they get in your way sometimes. But
they do. Well, guys, like I said, I'd love to we want to get into a conversation about the issues around addiction and within both of your communities that you guys are leading in the two different cities, and what you're seeing and what's working, what's not working, and questions and comments. And let's just have a nice, lively discussion about it. But first, I'd love to hear each of you tell us, 30,000 foot story about a little bit about what got you where you were and how addiction has touched your life. Why don't you go first, Bobby?
Okay. So I grew up in a tiny town that had no traffic. It's a mining town east in the desert here in Southern California. Kaiser Steel owned it. They started it in the 40s in response to, I should say late 30s, in response to World War II. And it was a town that produced iron ore for steel that made the warships for World War II. And Henry J. Kaiser started it. It was a really tiny town, kind of a roughneck environment. My father, grandfather, and great-grandfather worked in the mine. And in many cases, it was a pretty safe environment with respect to being kind of a small town. It had what I always heard from folks, a Midwest feel. It was also dangerous in some respects because it was a roughneck kind of population, and we had the demographic was Hells Angels, sort of gang members from different local areas that were about 60 miles away. It was a transient kind of community, but just about anything went. Could happen in town. There was no local government, no nothing like that. It was a company town. I grew up, my parents really didn't have religion in their life until I was about 7 or 8, and they decided to be involved in a, I would say, a conservative faith. My father decided to get sober and quit smoking all in the same day. Mm-hmm. And he considered himself, I would concur, that he was an alcoholic. And he did that sort of to save the family a little bit. And big lifestyle change, although he never really addressed his alcoholism except the drinking itself. But there was also within that, our family structure, there was some mental health issues. My mother was sort of the trifecta of mental health. She struggled with being bipolar, OCPD, and borderline. And it was sort of came about in my early teens, and her mental health declined significantly over a period of time. So we grew up, especially with the OCPD and OCD. If you don't know much about that, it's about perfectionism. It's about, but rules to create safety for herself. So we sort of conformed to those rules. And it was a pretty severe way of living. We went through a lot of emotional, some physical, psychosexual abuse in our home. And just living in the town we lived in, there was also a lot of abuse in town that really couldn't have happened if we weren't in that kind of environment. There was sort of a protection around what was happening in people's homes, and even the abuse that if there was alcoholism or whatever was going on. I went to my 40th high school reunion recently, and one of the things that came up in that was that I saw what was going on in your house, but my house was so bad. What do you do? So it wasn't like there was a sense of, we think of normal, there's no such thing really, but there was so much going on in that town that people, we just kind of supported each other in friendships. And it seemed to be a place where people could move and hide. If they had trouble somewhere else, they could move into our town and just hide perfectly. And it sort of the system was set up that way. As I became a young adult, there started to be signs of addiction in my siblings. There's 5 of us, 3 of us much older than the younger 2. And because of the mental health, it just, it was a continued denial of what was happening to some extent. And as I grew, I came out as a lesbian in my 20s, which was also an issue that my family struggled with. And so I went through a period of about 20 years where my parents didn't speak to me. And I was having a career. I decided to be very, I would say, public in a sense of my sexuality because of the shame around it, not because I really wanted to be public, but because I was in therapy dealing with mental health, and it became apparent to me that any secret that I had was hurting me. It's the very place I was doing war with myself. And so I became very visible with who I was, including the mental health struggles I had, and including the addiction that I was facing in my life with my family. I did not struggle with substance abuse or addiction in that way, but it seemed to be all around me. And the more I hid it, or I should say the reverse, the more I was honest about what I was struggling with in my own family. I was in Al-Anon to deal with it, and to try to come to terms with what it meant to be someone in a family where I was the only one that wasn't struggling with addiction out of 7 of us. My parents struggled with it. My siblings struggled with it. So it became a system and a culture within our family of not necessarily the addiction, but not dealing with the addiction. Became the culture. Not dealing with mental health issues became the culture. And so the more I was honest about it with myself and transparent about it in my life, I found that the more I was healing from the very life I had grown up with. And so I started to see changes in my own life. Fast forwarding to this day, to today, I have 2 brothers who died last year, a month apart. My older brother, 10 months older than me, suicide, mental health, died of methamphetamine, fentanyl, in a hotel room after having been on the street for 4 years. That's how his life ended. My middle brother, who's 6 years younger than me, died of alcoholism and was found 3 days after his death in Missouri, actually. He moved to Missouri, did a geographic, and just succumbed to, literally had gone, I think he'd been in a recovery facility twice, but never was able to, I would say, find a program that worked for him. And maybe, I don't even know if the program was really about, I don't know if he really believed that he had an addiction. He just wanted to get sober. That was just my own experience of him. And it finally came down to both brothers. We just had to step away because of the everything in our capacity to support them in, they just didn't really want it in this life. This wasn't the life. In this life, they were just not going to become sober. There was too much shame. There was too many mental health issues that they were dealing with. And because the family was so dysfunctional and fractured, it didn't really support that. So unless you had it within yourself, and I don't even know what that means because I can't really explain. I sort of think of myself as a miracle, that I was able to come out of it and thrive in my own life. And so I became a minister actually in the tradition that I'm in, because it was just it became a very natural pathway. I was excommunicated from my own faith. So I had to explore and figure out what my own spiritual life would be. I became a minister in the tradition I eventually found. And what I found even in the tradition I'm in is, I would say that about half the people in our community are from are in a 12-step program. It's a very compatible spiritual tradition because it actually has a lot of 12-step elements in it. And for people that have been unchurched, people that have been traumatized by religion, which happens, they find our community as a place to heal. So the 12-step program and our spiritual community is a really sort of nice, compatible system for them to come into. And I became a minister about 10 years ago, and have been in about 3 communities before I became the spiritual leader of this particular community that actually sits in Long Beach, which is an even larger metropolitan area. And we have 12-step programs that meet in our facility. We're about to do a merger with another spiritual community. And one of the largest AA meetings is in that particular facility. And those folks often attend our our offerings as well. I deal with the addiction in my own family in ways that my spiritual tradition really supports. And I was really excited about what you're doing, Tom, from a standpoint of the recovery as far as an immersive program. I find that to be very helpful and very in line with what we do too. So that's my short story. So,
it's really interesting, Bobbi. I mean, I hadn't heard that. I mean, Caceres had intimated that you had quite a story to tell, actually. I think sometimes when you think back to those times when like a town was led by a company, and there was not as the rules and the things. I mean, people, we here, the 3 of us, come from that world when there were no cell phones and there were no, and we got spanked, I think, and I did anyway, and this and stuff that, wouldn't go today, right? Some things that wouldn't go, but these experiences that we went through, I think were traumatizing to us in a way that maybe we didn't realize. And Tim will talk about his story too, because he came from quite a, dysfunctional past as well. And, we find too, Bobbi, that we find people come with religious and spiritual hurt that come to us. And they come, and I know Tim has that come to him too. And they find a peace in when they show and it clicks for them. And for us, we want to meet people where they're at. And we want to let them start wherever they have to start and search for a God. And many times it's the Christian God, but sometimes it's not. And we let them find their way. It's our idea to show them the way and show them what the founders of AA did. But beyond that, it's a path, and we hope people find some recovery from it. It's what the 12 steps did.
Right. And in our faith tradition, it's it really becomes, I talk about the God of your own understanding. And even if you're, I grew up Christian, even in the Christian faith, God is not the same to everyone, because we tend to, people tend to create God in their image, which is a God that is demanding and unloving. And because if we had that experience in home, we tend to place that on what God is. And so in our faith, we do a lot of healing around that specific principle so that people can come to understand that the universe is actually quite friendly. We're the ones that set up sort of this, that there's an enemy. And, I found the enemy, and it's me. So
I had that too. So Tim, why don't you give us your 10,000 foot? I know you've probably got your input on, and your 10,000 foot on what got you where you are, and your experience with addiction in your family and your life.
Well, my story and Bobbi's are very, very similar. Growing up in a small Midwestern town, in this case, there was, my parents were never married. And so I look back at both my biological parents, at the brokenness of their past, and I recognized they were both looking for something to salve that pain. And bam, I was conceived in the search for love, right? And they never married, and so I grew up just really not knowing who I was. But I didn't know who I was, and my mother eventually married a man who was alcoholic and abusive. And so that's the home I was raised in. I was told I was a worthless SOB without the acronym. And, I became the oldest of 5 children birthed in that marriage. So there were 6 of us. And I just always felt like the outcast, and that was intentional, on many people's parts. And so when you feel that way, you really don't know where you belong or who you are. But thankfully I had a praying grandmother. I really attribute her to the reason I am who I am today, and met Christ at age 14 at a crusade in a nearby town, but wasn't raised in the church. So I didn't really have a church background at all, but I always had a sense that God was looking out for me. I always had that sense. And then really came into more of a revelation of who he was when I got to college. But still, even in my adult life, like you said, Bobbi, sometimes we tend to kind of lean back on the coping mechanisms that we had in our youth. And so that's the continued, I'll say, struggle. I don't mean that in a strong term, but I just believe we all have those demons that if we don't recognize that we were born for greater things, then we'll give our life to lesser things. And and Bobbi, I love what you said about I believe God is much kinder than we give him credit for. I believe we blame him for a lot of the bad stuff. In reality, it's the result of our own choices. And yet he doesn't give up on us. And that's my story. He didn't give up on me, and eventually got a chance to make some better choices than my siblings. I also lost a brother to alcohol a couple of years ago, another brother who kind of the consequences of not taking care of himself didn't pass, but he's in a rough shape right now. And the only one of my siblings to I think only one of my sisters graduated high school. I'm the only one that went to college. Just you see the results of choices that you kind of, your flesh wants to blame your parents, right? But in reality, we get to make our own choices. And yeah, we have to fight through some things. But to be honest, it's funny. I tell the story. I've got a scar here on my wrist where I was sledding as a kid on a piece of tin, and the tin stopped and I didn't. I slid off of it, right, and cut my wrist. And people were like, "Oh, did you try to take your life?" I'm like, "No, I was just an idiot and sliding on a piece of tin." But I show that to people because I just want to say, obviously, people resort to wounding themselves sometimes when the pain is so bad. For me, it wasn't self-inflicted, but I realized that I've got to do something about the wounds of my life. I actually had a dream a couple of years ago. Well, it was longer ago than that, probably 20 years ago. And in my dream, I kept bleeding through my shirt sleeve, like it would be soaked with blood. And I would look down and say, doggone it. I'd change my shirt, and go on. And then this shirt would get soaked. And it occurred to me, because I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, maybe I should address the wound and quit bleeding all over myself and everybody else. And that's the comfort. That's I believe the healing that my relationship with God brought to me, was a recognition of who I was, to quit looking at other things to try to fill that void and to get the wound addressed. But, I still carried a scar. And I tell people, scars happen. They do. And you can either bleed to death or you can get that thing healed up, but you're always going to have a scar. Today we recognize the wounds that Christ took for us, and his hands and his feet still bear the scars, even though he's resurrected. And yet they're reminders of the price that was paid. And so my wounds are a reminder of, yeah, I had it rough. I'm not perfect. I don't want to hang around perfect people. I really don't, because I'm not. And that's, our church is called Restoration, and we meet in an old 1800s warehouse. And it's just the coolest thing, because the people that the Lord is bringing to us are imperfect people, and just like me. So we feel right at home around each other, and we love one another through the process. And related to addiction, Tom, I never did become addicted to substance like I saw in my household, but I was addicted to other things. I was addicted to people's approval, and I had to do it perfect so that people would affirm me. And that was something as a pastor that will just kill you, because you can never make everybody happy.
Right.
So I had to learn how to be confident in who I am as a son. And receive people that are imperfect and in process. And you know, Tom, you know this, but a few years ago, a couple, 3 years, we've only been going 10 years. So about 2 years ago, we began to have a community of people that were in addiction recovery, various stages, start coming to the house. And I didn't quite know how to handle it, because I'm glad that you're here, other than to smile and give you a hug and try to encourage you. What else can I do to help? And that's when we met Tom and came to believe. And it's been a bumpy road. You know, I understand the addictive lifestyle, even though I wasn't addicted to substance myself, but I have seen so many of these friends of ours come and go. And sometimes there are wins, and sometimes there are really tragic losses. An example, as you know, Tom, was last year, Father's Day. I baptized a young lady at age 19 who had just come out of a meth addiction. She was living in a shelter for women, just doing so well. Radiant, beautiful girl. I've got a picture of her, you know, in the baptism tank, and she's just high beam headlight smile. The tattoo on her shoulder said blessed. It's like, wow, this girl's got it going on. And within a week, she made a bad choice, went out with some friends, got exposed to fentanyl. It killed her. So within that window of a week, I went from laying her in the water to laying her in a casket. And it really just something to me that I'll never get over. I realize what a battle it is that we're in. And I just want to do everything I can to encourage, support, love, walk with, you know, these men and women in various stages of recovery. And, you know, for the rest of my congregation who haven't experienced that, they too have behaviors and patterns and wounds. We're all in various stages of recovery. And I love it that I get to hang around people who get that, who accept folks where they're at. Of course, we have desires and we want to see them grow. We don't want to see another tragedy like that young woman. But the process is messy. It's painful. It breaks your heart. But I am glad that we have a heart to break, you know, that we care, that there's compassion. And so just like the old building we meet in, you know, there's lots of things you can criticize about it. You can talk about all the stuff that needs to be fixed, or you can say, I'm just thankful to be where I'm at today on the journey. And that's where, Tom, I'm so thankful for Came to Believe, just because it gave us a tool to help people in that process.
Well, that's another amazing story, Tim. And, you know, how you both have come through brokenness clearly and are on the other end of it, and still growing. I'm sure you'd all both say. Tim, I know, you know, I've known you better. I mean, I'm still trying to get you in the gym, so there's still something wrong. But I told him I had to.
Like I said, he's a good friend of mine. So I don't know what the problem is.
Jim, yeah, that's just not it. You know, Alicia and I will come down again, and
I know you will with your meat cookies. Yeah, I understand.
But you know, that brokenness, you know, part of getting recovered and getting growing is first of all identifying that you're broken, you know, right. And identifying that, and then having some tools, and that is our secret sauce, and that is what really works with us, Bobbi. And Tim saw it because we came to his church and did it with his church, is that we take this process in a weekend, and it really can be taught in a weekend, this process of the 12 steps, which give tools and allow people to start on a journey. And we hope break down, you know, the biases and the prejudices of all kinds that they come with, and let them be able to be open to a new way of life, and then embrace some tools. And that's what we really want them to do, is embrace some tools that are straightforward with a little bit of practice. And we talked about this over coffee in California, about what we do on a daily basis to what we would say our daily spiritual practice. And I call it my 10, 11, and 12. But I know that, I'm sure you guys too there's something that we're doing all the time, but that recognition of the brokenness and moving out of it is really a process that goes on forever.
That's right.
You know, Tom, with respect to brokenness, it's kind of an interesting, I mean, in some respects, we all get broken, you know,
Mhm.
and I hate to say I'm broken, but there's parts of me that have been fractured to some extent.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there's a Sufi poet that some of you may know, Rumi, that talks about the fact that the only way that you can open your heart is if it's broken. It has to be broken
Mhm.
open. And I think there's something to the journey of, there's not a person on the planet that hasn't suffered in some way, shape, or form. And it almost feels like it's part of the journey. And sadly, it's how we
Yeah.
learn. And that that brokenness can be something that we can derive shame from, which I think a lot of us
Mhm.
do, or we can look at it as a place that we look and heal from,
Yeah.
heal in. And I just I don't know anybody that gets by with it in life, that moves through life without some part of that. It seems to be part of the human condition and the path.
Bobby, when you'll hear alcoholics sometimes, they're recovered alcoholics, say grateful recovered alcoholic, and they're grateful because they were able to recognize and move through it. They're grateful that whatever brought them to this place that made them have to make some choices and better choices and have to take on a process in life that took them out of their circumstances, and gave them better circumstances. And here's the other thing that, and I totally agree with you. Everybody's got this. It's a suffering seems to be something we all do at some level, and we're destined to it. But it's what we do with it that
Yep.
matters. It's how
Yep.
we look at it, what we do with that, and how we look at it. And today, I'm on this show doing this with you guys to help somebody else
Right.
who's not gotten as far as we've gotten
Right.
with it. So that there's openness to hear you talk about it, Bobby, about what you've been through and what you've been through, Tim. And we're here talking about it. But here we are sitting, going on with life. And we're having successes and we're living day to day. And this is really important because we didn't come from perfect worlds and we're not perfect.
Mm-mm.
But we can share that. And I think that's so important part of this.
Yeah. And that really, Bobby, you talked about church hurt. And I get a lot of that too from people who've come and they've been in other environments where that's happened. And that's an unfortunate reality too, because churches are full of humans, right? Broken people. And I hate that, sometimes the church can be the source of some of that hurt. But I rest in the fact that there's always hope. There always is hope. And finding that hope, Thomas, like you said, that's kind of why we do what we do, to help people know that there is hope. It's available, and to help them discover that and to begin walking on that journey for recovery, no matter where the hurt came from, to just be able to recognize we all need it. And maybe we can walk together on this path and find it together.
We talk about that we at Came to Believe, we stand outside the door. We take this position that Reverend Shoemaker wrote that poem. And Tim, I read that at your church, I think, when I was there. It always brings tears to everybody because it's quite powerful about the idea that we all have a different purpose in life, but standing outside the door for me is that that door, which in the poem is the doorway to God, but that God is how he reveals himself. And then how you worship the God and where you go and how that leads your life. That's through, once you're through the door, but you got to get through that door. And there are so many people in this world that are so far from the door that if we don't meet them where they're at, which means some tolerance, right? And that we have to, and lack of judgment completely, to allow them to work a process on their own. And if they can embrace, right, the four absolutes, we were talking about it. I was talking about it with Bobby, and I know, Tim, you've heard this, and you guys in that audience have heard it. That say to someone, if you could be honest, unselfish, pure in motive of what you do, and live in love, would that be a good thing in your life? And some people, that's those four core kind of principles resonate with everybody, and they can give hope. If we think somebody thinks they can have that. And also, you mean that's all I have to do? Because the religious hurt sometimes, guys, is they've been brought up with, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to meet these rules, and you got to do this first.
Yep.
Right. But I've said, could you just do those 4 things? You could see people at retreats, guys, that go, oh, I said, just work. Can you do that? I have to reduce it to that sometimes.
Sure.
So just, can you do these 4 things and just have it be something to try to work towards? And such transformation can start with just simple, but that's where we're at, is starting at that far away. I don't know if people come to your congregations in that level far away where you have to start there, but we do, and we seek those out, actually.
I think in our community, a lot of people come in with this idea. I always use this scripture to start in the Bible: be therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And there's a lot of pressure in the Western culture about what that might mean. And I really teach it from a different place, which is be perfect in love, which is first start with, sometimes I have to start with, can you love another? Because sometimes loving myself might be more difficult. But it's really about that. It's how I am, not what I am, but how I am in the world. And we often teach from, can I be a beneficial presence in the world? Which is, and I would even take tolerance a step further, which is into the fact that I'm going to, yes, meet you where you're at. I'm going to love you where you're at. And it's your choice. You can choose to stay in a place of self-loathing, stay in a place of judging others, and that's fine, but it's not helping you or me, because it all comes back to hurt people, right? And people that are in this victim place are going to hurt others because they're not conscious about how they are in the world, and they think they don't matter, and they think that what they do doesn't matter, but it all matters. Not from a standpoint, again, if I'm going to go back to being perfect, then I'm going to look at it as the approval of someone or something. And what we're talking about is, there's grace in all of this, which is, I'm having a journey. Nobody's watching you and keeping score, in a sense of sort of the greater sense of what God is, at least in our faith tradition. We're here to support you on a journey to come to love who you are, just as you are. You don't have to be any more than who you are, but who you are really. Not the wounds that are showing up in the world. If I'm showing up as one big wound, then I am contributing to everything that's happening out there. And I can have a life of feeling that I'm loved and love. And that's what we teach in our spiritual community, is how do I be that? Oh, I love that.
I think that was my dog that commented.
That's what I'm talking about.
I think too, Bobbi, as you're talking, I just am thinking about how oftentimes we can't accept other people in their state because it reflects poorly on us. Yeah. And so you're absolutely right. The scripture does say, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that's kind of where it begins. How you really can't love others unless you have that recognition of, I'm okay because I have a Father who created me, who formed me, who knew me before I was knit together in my mother's womb, the scripture says. And my journey to understand and know that love, then I can kind of relax a little bit and not be so harsh on other people. And that's where religion has gotten off track, I believe. We expect people to perform to a certain standard, and we keep raising the bar that you can never reach. And so when it's a constant attempt to just prove your worth, and then you will never accept someone else because their brokenness is a reflection of your own. So coming to that place of peace and recognizing I don't have to perform for anyone. That was a place for me as a pastor. I don't know how about you, Bobbi, but my first few years, it about killed me because I thought I've got to do all these things that people expect me to do. And when I really found peace, and I think even greater effectiveness as a pastor, was just to recognize I'm not going to be able to make everybody happy. I spent my whole young life trying to do that, and I could never do it enough. And, in the end of my mother's life, she was so bitter, talked about mental illness. I mean, my family actually got a court order to keep me from her funeral. It was that dysfunctional.
Wow.
And talk about rejection. Oh my gosh, that's like the ultimate rejection. But thankfully, my heart has been healed to a point where I realize, you know what? I have nothing against the people that have wounded me or have treated me in a bad way. It's like, I want nothing but the best for them, because I recognize a lot of their reactions are coming out of their own pain. So how can you hold them guilty for just reacting out of pain? As you said, Bobbi, hurt people. And so it's just a beautiful freedom to find in that.
I wonder too, Tim, when you talk about being a minister, the journey as a minister, pastor, is one of letting go of being perfect, because actually that's what people don't need from us. They need to know that we make mistakes and that we aren't, and the vulnerability that comes through as a teacher is that it's okay. It's okay to fall down. The point is getting up.
Yep.
And that's what we demonstrate. At least for me, I demonstrate falling down and getting up.
Exactly. Yep.
And having that self-love to honor both parts, the falling down and the getting up. And
I was talking to a group of men last night about that very same thing, Bobbi, and we talked about pornography, which is another form of addiction, right, Tom? I mean, these are things that we use to salve our pain. And I said, I was speaking at a church one time where I used the statistic, which is that 50% of men in any given church are addicted to pornography. I mean, not just that they're tempted to look at it, but they can't not look at it. Tom, like you described, not having one beer because you can't stop with one. To that level of addiction, 50% of the men in our churches, and I shared that at a church, and the pastor pulled me aside later and kind of rebuked me. He said, I don't believe that statistic at all. I said, well, why wouldn't you? And he said, well, because I'm not. And I said, oh, please don't tell your men that, because now they can't come to you as a safe place to share their own heart, so.
Yeah. There's no, sometimes I go talk places too, Tim and Bobbi, in New York City, and I'm talking to what we call normies, right? We don't know what that is, but people who haven't had this, had to go through a process of life to make a transition like I've had to. And I talk about my addiction and the things that I did and the terrible, with such like ease and transparency. I've had people pull me aside and say, "Geez, you sure you want to tell everybody about that?" Like, tell me. So I say, but guys, if I don't tell people, how does anybody know? Right. And how is anybody going to connect with me if they don't know that I've been through that? And not only that, I still make mistakes. If the last thing I want anyone to think is that I do everything perfect every day, because I need the same grace and I need the same forgiveness. And if I don't want judgment, if I was judged on everything I ever did or do, but the other thing is that even though we make mistakes, we still can move forward and positive. We're going to make mistakes. Even our program says in the 10th step, we commence this way of living as we cleaned up our past. We continue to take inventory. And when we make mistakes, we fix them. So it doesn't even tell us that if, it's when. So there's some freedom in that, guys, to allow people to know that it's a process, because there's so much perfection in this thing that we've got to, because if you, especially you guys who stand up in front of congregations, and you do, unfortunately, I really have a hats off to you, because people come in and look at you, I'm sure, with you guys got to be the perfect ones, right? But the idea that we have to have the freedom of make the mistakes, but you're still, it's not like you've lost some points now. You're down the rung in the ladder and you got to climb back up. It's, I don't know if that's making sense.
Yeah.
You are always growing, and you're just growing through and the mistakes. Actually, it's like that whole, I love that thing. If you don't have a broken heart, you can't, heal it. I guess you can't heal something that's not broken. If it's not broken, this process of doing this makes us better. If I have a process, and that's what we teach with the Came to Believe in this short amount of time, is give people a process to say, let's figure it out. Let's recognize what hasn't worked in our life. Let's identify what does work, and let's just work towards that. Let's move the needle that way. And we can see success in life. And oh, by the way, I'm not going to drink and drug anymore. And that's what we see. It's really, really something.
It's awesome.
The thing about us telling stories is that, as human beings, our DNA, we are storytellers, and we
Mhm.
heal through telling our story. We don't heal by keeping it in, because as long as it just sits within me, that's where it does its
Yep.
damage, is because I'm living from that story. And until that story gets out, because the truth about stories too is they change. Like, when I first came into young adulthood, my story of my childhood was much different than my story is today. The story then was broken. The story today is a story of healing, and that those very stories have changed as new information comes in, as I start to see myself as less of a victim and now a hero in my own story. But even the idea of AA is to get up and tell your story, right? To get up
Right.
and tell the story of how life came to be what it is. And even over time, that story should change, because life is different now. And if we don't tell a story that's vulnerable and authentic, then how is anyone else going to feel safe to do it as well? Because that's part of the healing, is telling the story and allowing it to shift and change.
I think related to that, Tom, I did a program once with a psychologist who did a research study, wrote a book on it, and the conclusion was this: that with about a 90% accuracy, sociologists can predict which marriages will make it and which ones won't, based on one factor: how they handle conflict. And I bring that up just because conflict is telling the truth in a healthy way, not shaming someone else, but being transparent and allowing the other individual to share their story, their pain, where they're coming from. If we can do that mutually, then with a 90% chance, we can predict which marriages are going to stay healthy and go the distance. I think that's such a powerful truth. And when I do premarital counseling, that's the first thing I tell people is learn how to handle conflict well. Be honest. Tell your story. Keep those lines of communication open. Otherwise, we internalize that pain. We internalize, the things that we want to say, but we feel like we can't, and it festers and boils up to an explosion that creates much more damage than processing those things along the way. So I think that ties in, Bobby, with what you're saying. To be honest, to tell your story, and even in relationships, that's just a much healthier way to handle it than what I was always tempted to do, because I saw conflict constantly in my home growing up. Is you internalize it. You don't tell people what you're really thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and that's more destructive than an argument. And
Right.
I never do that.
Because an argument means you care.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Bobby, when you said, I mean, I love that you brought this up. I think that we all need to talk more about this, as this reality of the story you would have told about your childhood when you were younger and the one that you tell today is different.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I would be the same way at 25. If you said, how was your childhood, Tom? I would have told you a very different story than I tell you today. A very different story with very different, cause and effect, causality that I experienced. And today I look at it very, very differently. And that growth, I mean, my growth came out of having to deal with recovery, but I wonder if everybody thinks that way, even people that haven't had any type of issue in their life that has caused them to have to make some big transformational process, like going to AA or a 12-step program. If they would say that, or is it part of the process that the three of us have had to go through, that has even recognized that there is a different story? Because it's changed me and how I look back on, like, my parents and my brothers and sisters, guys, because I look differently at my parents back then. And my father's still alive today, and I had much, much greater resentment on him 30 years ago than I do today, because I paint this childhood differently now. That was a very that really touched me that you said that, because I really relate to that, Bobby.
Well, our brains don't remember things accurately either. They interpret facts. They don't remember them, because we interpret them based upon our own experience, right? So if that's what we do, what would happen in life if we looked at the facts and looked at a combination of, yes, in some cases, the only victims in life truly are children and the elderly, in a sense of, we find that there may not be as much choice. So as a child, was I a victim? Yes. As an adult, I am not. And if I can change the story again, from victimhood, it's because I'm looking at what I believe about what happened to me and how I was affected. And so today, I know that because I'm no longer a victim in that story, that I have adjusted the story to be more relevant to the facts and less about, and that I've overcome and I've learned new ways to cope, and I see who I am truly more, not completely, not perfect. I just see a better version of myself. So in essence, if I can see a better version of me, then I can be that better version in the world.
See, I always am struggling with, my brain tells me I'm right all the time. And then what I'm really working on is dealing with everyone else's wrongness.
Yeah.
That's my joke of the day. Now, because Sarah's probably shaking her head at me now, saying she is shaking her head. He had to do it.
I see one of the comments says to change the focus from facts to possibilities, and that's exactly true. Because everything is possibility. The past does not exist, nor does the future. Right now is all we have.
That is so good to do. I was telling, I was with somebody yesterday talking in the city, and I said, I have a watch. I actually have a watch with all the times blocked out with past and future. And the only thing it shows is the time that it is right now. And boy, oh boy, have I learned that more and more in my life, that if I don't, if I'm so busy doing all the good all around, I miss the best. If I'm too busy doing things all the time and I miss what's right in front of me, worrying about what tomorrow is. That's just for me. Just so great. Guys, this has been, it went in a direction. We were hoping to hit to a couple other topics that we didn't hit, but it goes the way it went. I thought it was a wonderful conversation. And I hope everybody out there in the audience were able to pick up some of the wisdom here between us. I think we had wisdom today, right? I think listening to three of us that have had experiences in life and have some wisdom, it's wise to listen. I listened to you guys anyway. I'd love to have you back. I think this discussion, we just getting started. If you guys are willing, I'd love to have you guys back on soon. And let's just keep talking about this. Lots of comments have come in, and many more will come in. And I would just love to keep it going. I think, and again, any way that Came to Believe can help either of your communities, we'd love to talk to you offline about how we can come in and bring this program, that thing that we do all over the country that helps people break free from their addiction, that works in a weekend. We'd love to do, and we'd want to keep talking about it. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great Easter. Have a great weekend, whatever applies to you. And everyone else out there, we'll see you next Friday. We'll be talking about, we're going to have the CEO from City Relief, which is the largest homeless outreach organization in New York City. So we'll be talking a little bit about harm reduction and stuff next week. And we're also going to have somebody that is one of the leaders of City Team, which is a homeless mission in California on. So we're going to be talking about the facts and myths about homelessness and people living. And it's very interesting, guys. I hope you guys can tune in, because many of us have very stereotypical views of the homeless, right? And the way we act to them. And these two professionals who have been in this have really changed my view of it. And so has Casera, because she's kind of has us looking at this more, or has had me looking at it more going into this since she joined our team. So join us next week. Oh, also, guys, we are planning in May to change our time here. Believe it or not, we are going to change to Tuesdays at 1 Eastern. Recovery Live in May will tune to Tuesdays at 1 Eastern. There's a few reasons behind that. The world of media says that's a better time for doing broadcasts like this. So letting our audience know. But again, thanks, everybody, for your time today. And we will see you again here on Recovery Live. Great weekend.